Today I'm going to show you how to make two different styles of hinged accordion books. So these are going to be accordion books that are made from smaller sheets of paper rather than from one long piece. And we're going to talk about how to hinge the paper together to attach those pieces to make a longer accordion. I'm just going to go through some of the materials that we're going to need. So first I have some paper to make my accordion book out of. I have different colors because it's just going to make it easier for you to see what's going on in the demo, but your paper does not need to be different colors if you don't want it to. You can choose any color paper that you want. You can use text weight papers, which are lighter weight, but also for accordions, it's nice to use something that's a little bit sturdier, since a lot of the time for displaying accordions, we want a paper that will be sturdy enough to kind of stand up on its own. So the papers that I'm using are from the brand Canson, from their Mi Tientes line. And so these aren't super heavy cardstock weight papers, but they're just like a little heavier than your typical text weight paper. So I like these a lot for accordions. So for the first style of book, I have 6 sheets of paper. For that book, you can really have as many sheets as you want to. For the second book, I have 9 sheets of paper, and I have 5 sheets of one color and 4 sheets of the other color. I have some papers and boards for covering materials. So we're going to look at 2 styles of covers that are just going to be paper covers, soft cover. And again, I just have more of the same paper. When you're making a soft cover for a book, you want the paper for the cover to either be the same or heavier than the interior pages. So I just have more of the same Canson paper. You could also use like a heavier cardstock or cover weight paper as well if you want to. And then one of the covers that we're going to make is going to be a non-adhesive hardcover. So I have some boards for that, and we're going to use the boards with our paper. Then you'll need a ruler, a bone folder for folding, an X-Acto blade, or you could also use a utility knife like this style. And then we'll need some adhesives. So you don't need all 3 of these, you just need one type, but I'm going to talk about 3 different possibilities. So my favorite thing to use is an archival film adhesive tape. So this is really similar to double-sided tape, but it's just much thinner, and you won't be able to notice the thickness of the tape in your finished book. So I really like using this type of tape. The brand that I like is the 3M 416 tape that you can get from Talus, and that's really great for books because it's archival. So it's acid-free, and it will last over a long time without getting yellow or brittle or discoloring your pages. Other options for adhesives are an archival glue stick. So I like this Yoo-Hoo brand. That would be great. And then you can also use a PVA glue. And if you're going to use PVA glue, you also want to have a glue brush to use with that. Okay, so that's all we need. Let's get started. So the first style that we're going to do is a pretty typical hinged accordion, where we're just taking single sheets of paper. We're going to make a 1/2 inch hinge and fold the sheets in half. So what I've done to make sure that my book will come out to the size that I want it to be, I took my page size, my finished page size I wanted to be 5 by 7 inches. And so this sheet of paper is 7 inches tall, and it is 10.5 inches wide. And so I took the width dimension of 5 inches and I doubled it to get 10, and then I added a 1/2 inch to account for extra paper for making the hinge that we're going to make. Now, also when considering the paper that I'm using for any book, we want to think about the grain direction. And to test the grain, I would have tested the grain before I cut it down into this size, but you want the grain of the paper to be going in a direction that's going to be parallel to the folds. So to test that, you can just gently roll your paper in each direction and just feel for the direction that rolls a little bit easier. Like, you won't feel as much resistance in one way. You'll feel more resistance in one direction and less resistance in the other. So you want to go with the direction where you feel less resistance, and that's the direction that you want to make sure that that's parallel to any folds that you're going to make. So before I cut this down, I tested the grain and I made sure that I cut it so that my grain was going in this direction, which is parallel to the 7-inch direction of my sheet. So first we're going to make the hinge on all of our sheets. And to do that, take a pencil. I did not say that we needed a pencil in the materials, but you also need a pencil. I'm going to take my ruler, and from one side of my sheet, I'm going to just measure a 1/2 inch. And I'm going to make a little mark with my pencil. And so I like making 3 marks. So I've made 3 marks at a 1/2 inch. And then I just take my ruler and connect those marks. And I'm going to use my bone folder to score and fold this 1/2 inch tab, which will become our hinge. So I've lined up my ruler with my 3 marks. And I'm going to use the point of my bone folder to score. So I'm just holding the ruler down really firmly, and then I'm going to just pull this down along the length of my paper, along the ruler. I'm pressing it against the ruler just as if I were cutting with an X-Acto blade. And I can start to see, which you can see in the video a little bit, that there's an indentation that's being made here. And so this scoring is training the paper to fold. It's telling the paper that we're going to make a fold here in a minute. So I just do this, you know, maybe 2 or 3 times. And then the next thing I'm going to do is take the point of my bone folder and put it underneath this flap. And still I'm holding the ruler down really firmly. I'm going to run the bone folder along the ruler underneath the paper, and I'm pressing the paper up against the ruler. So just really need to do that one time. And now you can remove the ruler, and you see that we've kind of made a light fold. And now we can fully fold that all the way over. And so that's my first hinge. So I'm going to go ahead and make hinges on all 6 of my sheets of paper. Okay, so now I have 6 hinges on my 6 sheets of paper. I should point out also that I determined the hinge size based on my tape. So I chose a 1/2 inch hinge because I feel like it's easy to fold a 1/2 inch. Sometimes when you're folding like smaller than that, like a 1/4 inch, it can be a little tricky to make these hinges. But also you want to make sure that the hinge size that you choose is going to fully conceal any tape adhesive that you're using. So I can see that this will be completely covered. A 1/2 inch also gives us a little bit of room for error. We wouldn't really want to go larger than a 1/2 inch just because then I feel like the hinge starts to become a little bit obtrusive in the book. It just becomes like, you know, a distracting large hinge. So now that we have put hinges on all of our pages, we're going to now fold them in half, but we're not going to count the hinge as our part of our half. So I like to do this with the hinge folded down, and I put it so that the hinge is facing down at the table, and then I just fold it in half. And so when I'm folding, so we're essentially making folios now, which is just a single sheet of folded paper. And so when I'm folding, I like to use my thumbs to kind of like guide the paper into place, and then I position it so that the corners are matching as much as possible. And it's really important to get at least one of the corners to match up so that you have the what will become the head and the tail, or the top and bottom edges of our book, will be even. So I usually try to match up the corners as much as I can, but really just focus on getting, you know, like say like the left side of my book to match up really well. And so once you fold it, just crease it with your bone folder. I'm just gonna fold all of my pages. Okay, so now we can start joining these together. So I'm just going to start with one of my folios, and I'm going to join one of my green ones and one of these teal ones together. Like I said in the beginning, I'm just using two different types or two different colors of paper so that it's easier for you to see what is going on. But of course, you can feel free to use one color of paper or as many colors as you want to. So I'm going to start by showing you the tape method. And for the tape, when I use the tape, this is how these are going to match up. So here's my hinge, and then the cut edge, the edge that does not have the hinge of the other sheet, is going to fit into the hinge. And so when I use tape, I like to put the tape, rather than putting the tape onto the hinge itself, I like putting it onto the edge of the paper that is going to fit into the hinge. And so before you put the tape on, I usually will go ahead and put tape on all of my sheets of paper right from the beginning. If you do that, just know that you're always going to have one sheet that does not have any tape on it, because that's the first sheet. So like this piece of paper, this green piece, is not going to be joined into another page over here, so I would not put tape there. So I usually just remove one of them right from the beginning, and I don't put tape on it. But before you start putting tape on all of them, you might want to just kind of set them up how they're going to be joined together, just so that you're sure about where you're putting the tape, to make sure that it's going in the right place. So I'm going to go ahead and put tape on this one. And I like to leave this tape on a sheet of wax paper while I'm using it, just because the edge is pretty sticky, and if you just put it down on the table, it tends to pick up little bits of paper and dust and stuff, and like my roll already has a little bit of that on it. But if you just keep it on top of a piece of wax paper when you're storing it, just wrap it up in a piece of wax paper, that will keep it good for longer. It'll keep it from getting all kinds of stuff stuck on it. So with the tape, I'm just going to start by peeling a little bit off of the roll, but I'm not cutting it off of the roll yet. And I like to just hold the roll in one hand and then use the other hand to kind of like help hold on to the end of the tape, and then I guide it into place with both of my fingers, and I'm just like holding the roll off in my right hand. But you can do this however it feels comfortable for you. Some people like to just cut pieces of tape and then trim them down to the size of their page later. after they're stuck down, but I like to do this. So I'm going to try to position this as close to the edge of my paper as possible. But I still want to see just like a tiny sliver of the paper showing. So I'm going to place that down, and then you can use your X-Acto blade, or you can use scissors to cut it. I'm just going to use my scissors. And then once you stick that down, also use your bone folder to just make sure it's really pressed down. So I just kind of burnish it a little bit. And so that's what you're looking for when you apply the tape. And so now this has a carrier paper on it, and when we're ready to stick these two together, we're going to peel this off. So I know that these are going to fit like this. My tape is on the correct side of my blue paper. And so when I'm ready to stick it on, I'm going to put this green sheet on the table with the hinge facing up towards me. And then I'm going to lay the blue piece on top. And I'm fitting the cut edge of the paper into the hinge. And I'm just sliding this back and forth to make sure that it's matched up with the edge of the green paper. And so again, like sometimes, like I cut this paper by hand. Sometimes when we cut paper by hand, things can be a little bit irregular. So I'm noticing that my blue paper just is a touch longer than the green paper. So I'm going to choose one edge that I'm always matching up to. And so I'm going to say that I'm always going to match things up to the left side here, my left-hand side. And then after the book is finished being put together, if you have access to a guillotine or a paper cutter like we have in the bookbinding studio, you can always trim the other edge of the book. So that's just one way to deal with that. So once I have it in the positioning that I want to, I'm also going to check to make sure that my folds match up. So I want to look back here and see that my folds are straight with each other and that nothing is super crooked. Like I wouldn't want to look back here and then see something like this happening where it seems lined up in the front where my hinge is, but then it's really crooked back here. So this lining up, these folds being aligned with one another, is actually more important than how this fits into the hinge, because the hinge is going to cover this up. So if things are a little bit off here, it'll be okay. We also still have the ability to trim this a little bit if things are really crooked. We could always just trim a little bit off. If we need to put more tape on there, that's fine. So again, my most important things I'm looking for here is that it lines up with one of my edges, and then it lines up at the fold. So once I have all that in position, I'm holding this blue paper down really well with my left hand, and I'm going to peel the carrier paper off of the tape. And then I'm going to press down the hinge. Just press it down. You can also press it with your bone folder. And now we have two sections joined of our accordion. So once I start to, have a few sections together, I like to let the underneath sections just come forward so that I don't ever have like a whole stack of paper under me. It just makes it a little bit easier to work usually. So now my blue sheet is the bottom, and I have the hinge facing up towards me. I'm going to take my next piece of paper, which is my green sheet, and I'm going to line that up in the same way. And so first I'll show you guys the glue stick glue. And whenever we're using glue, it's good to have some scrap paper around. So I just have these like scrap strips of paper. You could also use newsprint. This is going to help us protect the other paper from getting glue on it where we don't want it to. I'm going to actually apply the glue onto the hinge this time. And so I'm putting a piece of scrap paper underneath to protect the other page that's underneath the blue paper. And then I'm also going to put a scrap piece of paper on top to make sure that the glue doesn't get any further than I want it to be on the blue paper. So this is my hinge. You can see how it can fold over. These are my two kind of like barrier papers right now. And now I'm going to take my glue stick and I'm going to just apply the glue, and I'm holding down this top sheet of paper so that it doesn't move on me. So now any extra glue just went onto those scrap papers rather than onto my book. Okay, so now I'm just going to line up my green sheet again where I want it to be. And then I am going to fold my hinge over. I'm going to press this down with my bone folder. Okay, so now we have 3 sections of our accordion. And we can check to see how we're doing so far. So this actually is looking pretty good so far. Like the folds are pretty even. Accordion books are a structure that I always feel like is trickier than it looks. Like it seems like it's a pretty simple concept, but it's really actually very difficult to get the folds to be even with one another without having like this kind of stair-stepping kind of look after they're done. So it takes a lot of patience to make an accordion book, and it takes a lot of practice. So now we're going to use our PVA glue for this hinge. And there's two ways that I think you can use the PVA. So you can use the PVA with a glue brush, so I'll show you that. That's pretty much the same as what we just did with the glue stick. So I'll do one with a brush. So again, I'm putting my barrier sheets down, my little scraps of paper to protect the other parts of my book. And I just put a little bit of my PVA in a dish here. And I'm going to just get some on my glue brush and brush that onto this little hinge strip. You don't need a ton of glue. Oops. You don't want it to be like really gooey gluey. You just want like a really thin coating of glue there. You want to try to avoid having glue that squirts out when you press the paper together. Okay, and so now I'm going to line up my blue sheet. And then I'm going to press my hinge down. The one thing about PVA is that because it's wet, it does dry pretty quickly, but because it's wet, it is also a good idea to let, even for just using it for hinging, it's a good idea to let this dry under weight. So that's kind of one reason why I don't like using it as much as I like using the tape, because it also might mean that you need to stop while you're putting your accordion together and let like just this dry under weight. And then wait to continue hinging the rest of your pages together. It might also depend on how fast or slow your glue is drying. If it dries very fast, it might be fine. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you're noticing that after you make a book using PVA to make your hinges, and then your pages are really warped and all like kind of wiggly looking, then that means you probably should have dried this under weight. So you can just use like a heavy book or something, you know, put a heavy book on top of it, let it dry for like 10 minutes, and then move on. So now I'll show you the other way that I like to use PVA. If you have it in a bottle like this, we can just kind of put a few little glue dots. Okay, so I'm gonna line up my paper, line up my green paper on top of my blue paper. And then if you have a bottle like this, you can just apply a few dots. And so again, I'm trying not to squeeze out a ton of glue, and I'm just putting a few little light dots of glue there. So these are like, some of these actually are a little bit too much. I'm just gonna like tap them off with my finger a little bit. But PVA is really strong, so just like a little dab will actually be great for holding things together. So that is an option too. And then again, just press that down really well and press it while it dries if you think it's needed. Now I just have one more section to join. I think I'm just going to use my tape for that. When you make an accordion book, you should choose one adhesive method and use that for your whole book. I'm just showing you all the different adhesive options, but you pick the one that makes the most sense for you to use based on the materials that you have or the materials that are available, what you like working with once you try them all, and just use one adhesive type. Okay, so now we have an accordion with 6 sections. So that means we have 12 pages. So one thing that you might notice now is that we have one section that has this extra hinge on it. We don't need that hinge, so we're just going to cut that right off. You can do this right from the start if you want to. But if you're not sure, you can definitely wait till the end and just do it at the end. But I'm just going to use my ruler and my X-Acto blade to just cut that right off. And now this book is ready to get a cover. So the second style of accordion we're going to make is called sometimes a French fold accordion. For this style of accordion, we're pretty much using like full sheets of paper to create a separate hinge, but then you end up with this great like double-sided book. So the sheets of paper that I've cut down are cut down to like the exact page size, or like double the exact page size that I wanted it to be. So the height of this sheet is the height of my book, and then the width is double the page, individual page size. So I'm going to start by just folding these all in half. So we just need to be making folios, and you want an odd number of pages for this book. So I have 5 sheets of blue paper and 4 sheets of red paper if you wanted to use different colors. For this book, I use this style of accordion a lot to make artist books, and I do really like using 2 different types of paper, 2 different colors of paper, just because I feel like it just like complements this binding really nicely. So once you have everything folded, I like to set this up to kind of help visualize the way things are going to go together. So whichever piece of paper you have 5 pieces of, those are going to be like the back of the book, or they're going to kind of be the hinges. And then, so those are my blue sheets. And then my red sheets are sort of like the front side of my book. So this interlocking action sort of happens. So you can see how where two blue sheets come together, a red sheet joins them to one another. So like the two ends of the blue will fit into the fold of the red, and then over here the two cut edges of the red sheet will be joined by the fold of this blue sheet here. So yeah, it's kind of like interlocking folds. And I really like using tape for this binding. I find it to be really difficult to use glue, just because, you know, of that whole thing where the paper will warp. But if you're really patient and, you know, you stop after adhering every page, like with each page you would have to stop and press the paper until the glue dried. So you can make this one with liquid glue with PVA, but it's just going to take like a lot more patience and a little bit more time. So if we're using tape, the two pieces of paper on the ends, we only need to put one strip of tape on them. And so I'm just going to put a piece of tape on one edge. But on the other sheets, we're going to put tape on both edges. And so I'm always putting the tape on the inside of the folds. And don't forget to burnish your tape down. Just helps it stick a lot better. Okay, so now that I have all of my tape applied, I'm gonna get ready to assemble. And so again, like I was just saying, I kind of like to set these up so that they're starting to interlock with one another and I can really see how the pages are going to fit together. I just feel like it makes it a little bit easier as you're starting to put things together, especially if you have content in your book and you have pages with printing or any kind of art on them. You definitely want to make sure that you're setting it up and you have everything in the right order, and you know that you're putting the tape in the correct place and the right surfaces are being stuck together. So I think that really helps. Of course, if you were using glue, like either the glue stick glue or the PVA, you would be applying that glue as you go. So I would still set it up like this, but then sort of as you start to put things together, you would apply the glue just like we did with the first accordion that we made with the smaller hinges. Okay, so I'm going to start with my first two sheets of paper here. And so this is one of my end sections, so I only have tape on the one edge. And so that's obviously the edge that we're going to want to stick onto the red sheet. And so my red sheet also has tape here. So they're going to stick kind of into one another. So I like to lay the first sheet down on the table, and then the second sheet will be on top of it. So this can be like a little bit tricky when you first start, but I think you'll get the hang of it after you try a couple of sheets. So I line this up so everything's fitting together, and I'm going to just take the carrier adhesive off of only the two spots that are being stuck down. So like this one is not going to be stuck down right now, so I'm going to leave this carrier paper intact. I'm just going to peel off this one and this one, and then I'm going to stick this down, fold the blue sheet down. So now that's my first two pieces together. This piece goes down, the first one goes down a little bit differently than the others, but that's how you attach the first section. You can use your bone folder to make sure everything is really adhered. And now I'm going to take the next piece. So I'm going to take the next blue sheet, and I'm going to put my blue sheet and the blue sheet that I already have stuck down back to back. And so now we're going to start matching up the folds just like we did with the first accordion. So again, I'm looking to make sure that one of my edges is lined up as well as one of my folds. So that's what I'm going to do first. And then before I take the adhesive backing off, I'm going to just check and make sure that this can fold down. Every once in a while, like if things are a little bit irregular, you know, things are off a little bit when we cut paper by hand. If this piece was a little bit too long, it would keep this piece from folding down. Like if my folds matched up and I could tell that this edge of the paper was obstructing this red piece from folding down, I would just remove this blue sheet and I would trim a little bit off of it. But it looks like this one's working out just fine. So we really want those folds to match up so we don't end up with that stepped thing happening that happens with accordion folds sometimes. So we want all of our folds to be really up and down, nice and flush with one another. Okay, so now I have those together. And so now I'm going to move on to my next red one. And now I'm putting the red sheets back to back. So as I go down the line, I'm just always matching up red with red and then blue with blue. And so I'm just going to match those up in the same way. I'm going to match up the folds that are now facing me. And I'm going to match up this one edge. And I'm going to test to make sure that this folds down neatly before I take off the adhesive. And I can take off both of these at the same time, or I can start with this one and then take this one off after I've stuck down the other piece. So I'm just going to keep going in that way. Until I've stuck down all of my pieces. So here's one where, yeah, this blue sheet seems to be a little bit too long and it's keeping the red piece from folding over. So I'm just going to, well, I'm going to try to take a look and see if I can tell like how much. So I'm making sure that I really have it lined up with those other folds. And I'm going to try to see just how much it's going over the edge, and I probably just need to trim, I don't know, like 1/16 of an inch or something. So a lot of the times when I'm doing this trimming, I'm really just trimming like these little teeny pieces off. So like I just trimmed this much off of my paper. It's probably less than a 1/16 of an inch. But that'll help everything fold down a lot better. And now when I come to the last sheet, that should also be one that only has adhesive on one of the edges and no adhesive on the other edge. Just because it's the last page, it doesn't have another piece to join to. Okay, so that's our French fold accordion. And so you can see with this one, when you use different colors of paper, you also see like a little sliver of the color of the back sheet through to the front. So I kind of like that, but that's definitely something to keep in mind, because if you don't want it to be as much of a contrast as it is with these two colors, you could, you know, of course use paper that's all the same color, or you can use papers that just have a more subtle difference in tone so that it blends in more. I really like this book because you don't have to worry about printing on both sides of the paper, but you can still end up with like a really cool like double-sided accordion because you can just print something on to two different types of paper, and one of them will be the front content and one of them will be the back content. So that's why I really like this one. This is also a really cool one for cutting into the paper and then having like some show through happen. So if I were to cut a design into this red paper, then the blue would show through. So that could be a really cool way to use this style of accordion as well. And in fact, my accordion book, Love Grows in the Forest, was made in that exact way. That's the photo that was on the homepage for our class in the first week of school. It's still there, you just have to scroll down to see it. But that was made using this accordion style, and I cut through the front layer of the paper so that there would be a show through of like the paper on the back. Let's learn a few different styles of covers. Okay, so the first cover we're going to make is sort of a cover that just has two flaps that wrap around the first and last page of the book. So what you'll need is a strip of paper that is like 3 to 4 times the width of your book. So I just measure that by just placing my book down and going 1, 2, 3. I have like almost 4, so that should be great. And then you need it to be the height of your book or taller. So I'm going to just end up trimming this down to the height of my book. And also you want to pay attention to the grain directions. You want the grain direction of the paper again to be parallel to the folds you make. So for this sheet of paper, I need the grain direction going in the shorter dimension of the paper. So I've checked to make sure that is correct. So to get this sheet down to the height of my book, I'm just gonna place my book in the corner of the paper. And so I don't want to rely on measurements. Like I don't want to say I made this book 7 inches tall, so now I just have to cut this to 7 inches, because that number measurement might be just a little bit inaccurate. So to get like a more accurate measurement, we're just gonna actually use the book to take that measurement. So I'm just putting this in the corner of my orange sheet of paper, and then I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to make a mark right at the top of the book on the orange paper, and that is where I'm going to cut. But now we're not using regular measurements, we're just using this space. So to get that measurement so that I can use it to make more marks to line up my ruler with, I'm gonna actually take a piece of scrap paper and make sure that's really flush with the edge of my orange paper here. And then I'm just gonna mark that on to my scrap paper. And now this is my measurement. So I'm now lining up the edge as if this were a ruler, lining up the edge of the scrap with the edge of my orange sheet. And I'm just gonna make, again, like 3 marks, just like I would do if I had my ruler. And now I can use my ruler and line up those 3 marks to make sure that I'm cutting straight. And I'm just gonna cut that strip off. Okay, so now I should have a strip of paper that is the exact height of my book, so that looks great. Now what we need to do is take a spine measurement. So again, we just need a scrap paper. I'm gonna start by folding this paper at any point. So just put a fold in it. And now I'm gonna put my book into this little corner that I made, like it's sitting on a chair. And then I'm gonna, and you wanna use the side that has the hinges because it's a little bit thicker. So I'm gonna just fold this paper over the top edge of my book and crease at the corner there. And so now I've made this little spine measurement, and you can like reinforce that fold to make it easier to use. So now this is our spine measurement, and we're going to use that to figure out how much space we need to leave for the spine on this cover. So let's fold this strip in half. You can crease that fold. And now I'm going to use my spine measurement, and I'm going to line up one of these folds with this fold that I just made in my orange paper. And then I'm going to make a mark where the other fold is. And you can make 3 marks like we just did to cut the other edge, or you can use a triangle. So if you have a triangle, you just have to line up your short edge of the triangle with one of the top or bottom edges of your paper, and then line up the long edge with the mark that you made. In that case, you don't necessarily have to make the 3 marks. The triangle kind of saves you the trouble of making the 3 marks, but I want to make sure that we know both ways to do this. And then I'm going to take my bone folder and I'm going to score here against my straight edge, and then I'm going to keep holding my straight edge down, and just like we did for the hinges, I'm going to go underneath my paper with my bone folder, and then I'm going to run my bone folder along the edge of the ruler and press my paper up against the edge again, so sort of making like a preliminary fold. And then I'm going to fold that all the way over. And sometimes this can be a little bit tricky because there's 2 folds really close together. So just be careful when you are reinforcing this fold that you're really folding it in the correct place, because sometimes it can cause your spine to get crushed. So what we've just done there is we made this skinny spine. So that's what you should have now. And you can check to make sure that your book fits in. Just make sure that it's not too tight or way too big. Works well for the one that I just made. And now we're going to take this extra paper and use that to fold flaps around the first and last page. So the way I like to figure out where to put those flaps is that I just nest the book into the spine. And now I'm holding the book down. I'm going to open this front flap, And then I'm just going to make a little mark where I want that fold to go. So I'm just marking at the, what we're calling the foredge of the book. The foredge is the opening edge of the book. I'm going to make a little mark right there at the foredge. And then I'm going to fold there. And so I'm just going to make that fold in the exact same way that I did the one for the spine. So scoring, then doing this kind of preliminary crease, and then doing a full fold and crease with my bone folder. So we have one flap. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm putting the book back in. And I'm going to again make a mark at the top of the book. I'm going to line that up with my triangle. And if you don't have a triangle, you can use that same measuring trick that we used to trim this sheet down. So I can take this and I can say, like, from this fold, line it up to that fold, I can get that measurement onto my scrap sheet, and then I can use that to make 3 marks that I'm going to line up my straight edge to. Okay, so whichever method works best for you based on the tools that you have. And I'm going to score, make a preliminary crease, and then I'm going to fold this over. And now these flaps will fit around the first and last page of your accordion book, and it fits in there just like that. And if the flaps are uneven, like I can see that my flaps are a little bit uneven, you can just trim them down. So, you know, trim them down to be the same size, but you just want to make sure that you have enough of a flap folding over that it holds on to the book. The cover holds on to the book. So that's cover option number 1. Cover option number 2 is very similar to the first one, except for we're going to make a cover that attaches to the book. So again, I'm going to start by just cutting this paper down to the height of my book. So I'm going to just do that in the same way that I did the orange sheet. And we're going to make the skinny spine again. So that's the exact same thing. Since I'm using the same book, I'm going to use the spine measurement that I already made. But if you are using, you know, not using the same book that you already used, you want to take a new spine measurement. Anytime that there's something that's different about your book, like if you used a different type of paper, or you have more sheets, of course, you want to take a different, you know, take a new spine measurement. So I'm going to start by folding my sheet of paper in half. And then I'm going to mark my spine. And so for this one, you could choose to have flaps or not. But basically, we're going to attach this to the book. And so I like to put some tape, or you could use glue, and I'm going to put 2 strips of tape on the very back page of my book, which is where we're going to attach it. And so I'm going to attach that first, and then I'm going to trim my extra paper down. So I put my 2 strips of tape, and then I'm gonna nestle this into the spine. I'm gonna lay it down so that the adhesive side is facing up. You wanna make sure that this is fitting in the way that you want it to fit. So, you know, make sure that part of your book isn't sticking out like that. Make sure that it's flush with the head and the tail, aka the top and the bottom edges of your book. Nestle that into the spine space. Now I'm holding the book in place underneath, and then I flipped the cover up, and now I'm gonna lift these two carrier sheets off of my tape, and then I'm gonna just lay this cover back in place. But when you do that, just make sure that the spine of the book is coming up right against the spine of your accordion. And then I'm gonna press first close to the spine, and then I'll let the rest of that go down. And so now our book is attached to the cover. This edge, we could choose to either fold this over and have that flap, or we could cut it off. So I'm gonna cut it off just to show you what that would look like. And so I'm just gonna use my ruler, and I'm gonna use the straight edge of the blue sheet of paper to line that up with. And I'm gonna cut that. And then again, the same thing on the front. I could either cut it or keep a flap. So if I wanted to make a flap, I would again just like mark that. Could even do 3 marks right along the edge of my book to line up my straight edge too, or of course use your triangle. I'm gonna score and fold it. But this is a great cover option because now I have this nice cover on my book, but then that it's attached in this case, and I can still stretch my book out to display it. And the cover just kind of hangs out over here while it's on display. And it folds up into a neat little package when it's all done. So that's cover option number 2. Our third cover style is going to be a non-adhesive hardcover. So we're going to use bookboard for that. Bookboard can be a little tricky to cut down by hand. Normally we would use a board shear, which is one of the tools we would have in the studio for this. We can cut it down by hand. It's just like a little bit hard. When we're cutting this, we definitely want to use a utility knife because the blade is a little bit more like heavy duty than an X-Acto. So I like using this Olfa utility knife that has the blade that slides up. These are the style that you can like snap off the end blade to get a nice sharp new blade. So I've just snapped mine off. It's nice and sharp. I started by cutting one of my boards down already to size, and then I'll show you how to cut the other one. Before we start cutting, I just want to point out that board also has a grain to it, and it's really important that we make sure that the grain of the book board is in the same direction as the grain of our book. With the non-adhesive cover, it's probably not a big deal if it's in the other direction, but anytime we're using adhesive with boards, the boards will also warp just like paper, and we always want the warping to happen in the direction that's going to be parallel to the spine of the book, just because it will you know, it won't damage the book if it warps in that direction. It'll flatten out nicely. It also helps the book to function better. So that's kind of why we're paying attention to grain in our paper and our boards. But yeah, that's why you even want the board to be in the proper grain direction. So these boards have the grain marked because when we get a new piece of book board, a large sheet, we're going to test for the grain and then mark the board so that when we want to use the little scraps later on, it's really easy to tell what the grain direction is. So if you're starting with a new piece of board, you're going to go to the corner and you're going to try to like gently just like bend the board a little bit in each direction. And you're going to just try to feel which way has the least resistance. And that's the direction of the grain. So when I try to fold it this way, I feel like a lot of resistance, like the board would just like crack and break. This way I can feel that there's less resistance and that the fibers kind of give a little bit more. So that's how I know it's this direction. It's parallel to that direction, and I feel the least resistance in. So I have cut this piece down to about the same size as my book. For this particular cover, we're just going to cut it to the same size as the book. For other styles of hardcovers, you know, you see books that have that little space called the square around the cover. But for this one, it's great if it can just be the same size. And this one actually already is the right height for me. Another thing that's important to check is that your corners are square. So normally before I cut, I would check for a square corner, and you can use something like your triangle, or you can use a gridded cutting mat to test that. But basically you're just going to check for a right angle. And once I find a right angle, I usually just mark it with like a little square. And then I base all my other measurements off of that corner. If you don't have any right angles, then you're just going to trim 2 of the sides to make a right angle. So it's good that we have a right angle, and it looks like both of these are right angles. So that's great. So when I'm deciding how to cut this, I'm going to take my book block and I'm going to fit it into that right angle that I just marked. And for this book, I'm going to make sure that my book block is flush to the edge of the board. And then I'm going to make a mark on the edge that I want to cut. So I'm going to cut this edge here where all this excess board is hanging off. So I'm going to just make a mark there where I want to cut. And I'm in the habit of marking right on the edge, because when we do use the board shear, that's where we want to mark it, because it helps us line it up when we use the board shear. So that's my habit. So I feel like you should just do that even when we're cutting by hand. And now I'm gonna cut. So I'm gonna use my triangle for this. And I'm just lining up the corner of my triangle to that mark. And now I'm gonna use my utility knife to cut. And this board is really thick, so we don't wanna try to force the blade through in one shot. That is impossible, and it's a great way to cut yourself. So don't do that. We're gonna do many light cuts until we cut all the way through. So I'm gonna just advance my blade just a little, like a 1/4 inch, like about 1 blade's worth there. And I'm just I'm holding my ruler down really firmly, and then I'm just lightly scoring along the edge of my triangle. And I'm not applying a lot of pressure, like just enough to be able to make a little bit of a score. And I'm just gonna keep cutting in that same exact spot until the blade goes through. You can just, you know, take it slow. We don't want the blade to skip over the edge of the ruler and cut your hand. It's horrible. I've done it to myself. Please be careful. There we go. Okay, so now that's cut through. Like I said, mine is already the correct height, but if you needed to cut the other dimension as well, you would again like take your book, line it up into the right angle corner, and then you'd go ahead and make your mark on this edge and then cut in the same way. So now I have my 2 boards that are the right size, the same size as my book block. You can make sure that the boards are the same size as each other as well. You definitely want the boards to be the same size as each other. Once you cut one board, you can also base the size of the second board on the first one. And now for the covering material here, we're going to use more paper. So this is just more of the Canson paper that I'm using. And you can see that I have 2 different colors and 2 different sizes. So one of these, so the green sheets, are cut to fit this way on the cover. So I cut them to the height of my board, and then I have some overhang on the edge, and these are going to be folded over eventually. But the important thing is that this is the exact height of my board with enough overhang on each side to fold over. And again, I made sure that the grain direction was correct and that the grain would be going in the short direction. the direction I'm making my folds. And then this light pink paper, this is the width of the book. So it's the exact width plus enough extra to fold over as well. Okay, so we're just going to start with this sheet and one of the boards. And you're going to center your board on the sheet of paper. And then I'm going to take my bone folder and score against the board. And then do this like preliminary crease. And then I like to just fully crease it. So now we have a nice sharp crease, and then we're gonna fit our board back in there, and then crease this extra paper over that board. Until you've made this nice little fold over the edge of the board, and it should fit really snugly and the creases should be really sharp. You can also take that board away and then give that top fold a little extra crease if you need to with your bone folder. So that's the type of fit that you're looking for. And then you're going to do the same thing to the other edge. You want to make sure that this board is nice and snug into the side that you already folded. There we go. So now we have this one piece of paper that is folded around our board. Now we're going to do the same thing with one of the green sheets. I'm just going to take this one off and set it aside for now. So we're going to take one of our green sheets and do that exact same thing, but it'll be going in the other direction on the board. So now we have this sheet that wraps around our board with its nice snug edges. And now we're going to put them together. So I'm just going to leave this one where it is. And now we're going to take the first one that we folded. And I'm going to fit this into, so I'm going to put this flap of the pink sheet behind the main panel of the green sheet. So see how that slides right in there. Going to be like a little bit of a snug fit, which is good. And so now that fits nicely around the top edge. And then we're gonna bring that around and then snuggle in the other pink flap behind the main green panel. And if this is really difficult to get in here, sometimes it helps to cut the corners off a little bit. So you can always just like cut off a little bit of the corners of the paper on any of the flaps. Sometimes it helps to just get it started. And so this one's always a little bit trickier. You kind of have to just like gently force it in there. Try not to crush the edge of your paper with those beautiful folds you just made. And just kind of keep, you know, smoothing things down, maybe like jogging it in place, because sometimes the other sheet might have slid a little bit and we just need to get everything into the right place. And then it should fit like really nicely. So then the tabs kind of interlock around the piece of board and create this nice little cover. So now we're going to do the exact same thing with the other board, and we'll have two covers, and then I'll show you how they fit onto the book. Okay, now that we have our two covers together, we're just going to slide these right onto the book. So I just like to cut the first and last page down to like maybe halfway, just because that's going to make them fit into the covers a little bit better. And now we're just going to slide them right into the covers. So basically, whichever sheet of cover paper is the widthwise piece, so for me it's this light pink, that's going to be the inside of your cover. And this first and last page that we just trimmed down is going to fit right into this little slot here. So it's going to go behind that inner paper and just go into the slot in between that paper and the board, and you'll see the edge of the board still showing. Okay, so you don't want to do it in a way that ends up tucking. Like if you do it backwards, it looks kind of like this, like almost like your board is on the inside of the book. Like we don't want that, because that's not going to, the book won't close correctly, you know, so the book isn't going to function that way. So you want to make sure that always the page that you're tucking in, you want the board to end up on the outside of that fold. And so the only thing that should be on the inside of this fold is just this one sheet of paper. Okay. And you can just tuck that in like that. That's your French fold accordion book with 2-part non-adhesive hard covers. And I just need to give credit where credit is due. I believe that these covers are a Hetty Kyle invention, and she's an amazing bookbinder who has invented so many interesting binding structures. And I learned this structure from Sarah Parkell in a class at the Center for Book Arts several years ago, and I just love it. So there you have it. We made 2 different styles of hinged accordion bindings, and we made 3 different cover options for those. So why don't you go ahead and see what you can make with those.